Let's start this one off with a little riddle. What do Arachne, Awilish, Bakasura, Bellona, Erlang Shen, Kali, and Osiris have in common? If you're guessing they're all basic attack focused melee characters, you're not wrong, but that's not all. They have something else in common, and for that let's look at the Spring Split Masters LAN. More specifically, let's look at the picks, bans, wins, and the overall pick rate. Arachne, 0 picks, 0 bans, 0 wins, 0% pick rate. Awilish, 0 picks, 0 bans, 0 wins, 0% pick rate. Bakasura, 0 picks, 0 bans, 0 wins, 0% pick rate. Bellona, 2 picks, 0 bans, 1 win, 5% pick rate. Erlang Shen, 1 pick, 0 bans, 1 win, 2.7% pick and ban rate. Kali, 1 pick, 0 bans, 1 win, 2.78% pick and ban rate. Osiris, 1 pick, 0 bans, 1 win, same pick and ban rate once again. And now let's compare that to the top pick and bans, starting at 36.11% pick and ban rate. That's in your top 10s. And those characters have a significantly higher amount of contestation overall. So what we can see already is that basic attack oriented characters in melee range are not valued at all at the moment. The few picks that were made here were partially against relatively weaker teams as well, like teams that were considered weaker by the opposition, so they could test out those picks and maybe get away with them, kind of stomp over them. So these 1 picks or 1 wins don't really tell us much either. And that is with absolutely no disrespect to the teams that was played against. But technically there are some more AA characters, or were at least. The first one would be Mercury, though with the Mercury it's a little different. Mercury is a character that is rarely played purely on AAs, but if he is played focused on AAs, then it's more focused on crit. And with crit he has a very different playstyle. He's not the character that would hit down on you 20 times, he's a character that hits you 3 times and then you're either dead or he has to get out in order not to get blown up himself. So he's a bit of an edge case, somewhere in between, and that kind of shows. He's been picked at least 4 times, no bans though, and 2 wins. Not as terrible of a state as the other ones though. And then there are Raven and Nemesis, where I know that a lot of people would think that they are, or at least were, AA characters. With Nemesis that was true once upon a time, but she's come a long way since. Since her scalings have been changed and everything else around that, and there is a much higher focus on her ultimate overall now, there is not much left of basic attack Nemesis. Yes, she can still set up more basic attacks through her abilities, but she is picked for her ultimate and for the ability to control a fight relatively easily, so she doesn't really get much value out of the AA items as such either, and is often built completely without AA items or with just a single one like Hasten Katana to stick to enemies a little bit better. And a similar situation is what we have with Raven. Raven simply is not an AA god at this point. He is much more focused on his ability damage and also has other means of sticking to enemies at the same time and cleansing himself from ways that would prevent him from chasing. And once again, this very much shows in the stats. If we look at Nemesis and Raven, they are in the top 5 for pick and ban rate in the very Masters LAN. So they're definitely in a good place. They don't have any issues, because they're not focused on AA. Now, in all fairness, most of these characters were not very highly valued to begin with. A lot of them already had their issues way back in the day and have not really seen the light of day, especially in competitive, in a long time. They still have their viability as pub stomping guards, and that's kind of where they're classified right now. The new season didn't really change that either for the assassins. For them, early clear is so important, and most AA guards don't really have the best early clear, don't have the best rotation speed necessarily either, and they kinda have to pub stomp really hard to get somewhere in the game. For the warriors, things are a little bit different, but not so different. The bigger difference here is that warriors with AAs were generally considered very good last season and were kinda more towards the top of the chain. But that has kinda shown to not be the case in Season 5 anymore, not only because of the removal of Death Toll, which took away a lot of their sustain, which they really needed in lane, but also because of Warrior's Blessing just working very differently and kind of favoring ability guards more than AA guards overall, and due to the resurgence of sustain guards in solo in general, which they have a harder time against because they can't just poke them out or box them out especially as easily. So all of this was already the case early in the season. But then there were a few changes that would even further emphasize on these flaws or issues. The change happened in patch 5.5. According to Hunter players, Hunters had been struggling dramatically and were barely worth picking up at all. For most other roles, it felt like Hunters were just not as overly strong for the first time in a long time as they normally are, but well, that's a matter of perspective. I think it was mostly mages were stronger than Hunters, Hunters didn't like that, so they felt like they were useless. And because of that, there were a lot of changes to Hunter items. The most important change here was a change to Ekival. With the note, Hunters have been struggling, especially in the early game, the next few changes will all be specifically aimed at Hunters' early game. Their end game is quite strong, so their total power potential will mostly be left alone. However, we will be adjusting some bridge items and lower tier items to help Hunters reach endgame more smoothly. And what was buffed? Ekival. Increased physical power gain per passive stack from 7 to 10. And if you don't believe that change did a lot for Hunters and pushed them back up in the meta, look at the most picked and banned gods in the LAN, being Hachiman and Ram. AA Hunters. What a surprise. Anyway, Hyris was kind of expecting that to happen. And that's why they included some countermeasures for Hunters in the patch. One of them was Midgardian Mail. An effect that slows movement speed and attack speed is useful, but the 30% chance to trigger made it highly variable and difficult to rely on. We're removing the RNG and streamlining the effect to always trigger and stack up to its current power after multiple hits. New passive: when hit by a basic attack, that enemy has their movement speed and attack speed reduced by 10% for 2 seconds. This effect can stack up to 3 times and can stack with other item slow effects. So reliable movement slow, reliable attack speed slow, and the possibility to stack with other slows. In the same run, Witchblade also got a buff from 100 to 200 health in case you want some more of that slowing stuff for enemies. At the time I said that this is a very drastic change, which I kinda like because it's no longer RNG, but the change overall would have to be very closely monitored due to the extra power that the item would have. And here we are. Not much has happened since at all in that regard. Midgardian Mail still has the same passive for a price of 2,250 gold with 350 HP and 40 physical protection. So, very cheap, a lot of HP and a decent amount of protection with a very strong passive that you can counter halfway with Winged Blade, and even then you can only counter it temporarily, only ever so often, and you only counter half of it. Now ironically, the ones that were supposed to be hit by it didn't really get hit at all. A Hunter alone doesn't make it worth picking up Midgardian Mail, and for them being slowed isn't that relevant because they're usually at range anyways. It is, however, very relevant for the other gods that we talked about in the beginning. For them, being slowed is worse, and many of them also aren't able to invest into as much attack speed as Hunters are to offset the reduction. Those gods get completely left behind, as we can see by the performance in the SPL right now. They are simply not picked anymore. And that's not only because they're so directly countered by Midgardian Mail, but also because if you pick them, there is pretty much a guarantee that any half-competent opponent will pick up Midgardian Mail. You will not only counter that particular god, either the solo laner or the jungler, but you will at the same time still decently counter the Hunter, which again is at the moment a relatively strong role once again. No matter what, you will always need at least 2 items to counter Midgardian Mail. And considering that the slow gets applied while you're already under the movement penalty makes it even uglier. So typically you kind of want to at least have haste and katana, then a winged blade, and then something else with attack speed to really offset this item completely. I mean, there's only a handful of items in the game that provide 30% attack speed in the first place. The way the item is designed also makes it worse for AA gods that rely on hitting many hits than Hunters. Anyone who's got a quicker attack chain than 1.0, like Kali, like Arachne, like Erlang Shen, will suffer more because they stack the slow for themselves faster as well. These gods, who were not overperforming before at all, but rather underperforming, get severely crippled for something that has nothing to do with them at all, and was intended against somebody that usually is very strong against them in the first place. Most AA characters are most afraid of the hunter unless somebody else has an insane amount of hard CC and burst, because the hunters are the ones that can take them down before they can even get close if they don't have blink. Smite is becoming more and more punishing for ability focused characters or even hybrid characters like Awilish. I already talked about that in another video, and I don't really understand why. I don't want to say that anyone in the company has a personal vendetta against them and they get the occasional small buff, but outside of the reason being that a lot of them are able to pop stomp very well in lower tier games simply because AA characters in general work that way, I don't see a reason why. And if that is the reason, then all hunters would have to be nerfed all the time, because all of them can do that as well as all AA mages. But for some reason it's always the AA melees that get hit over and over, with the warriors being still in an okay place for the most part, until recently at least, and the assassins getting hit full on. I would like to see that change. No big whining from my side here, just not understanding really what's going on with that. And that's it from me for this video. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button with the bell, it really helps me out. DukeSloth, out.